Ladies and gentlemen, this is the MSP Online Marketing Podcast. I am your host, Chad Lyons. Before we start, as always, I'd like to invite you guys to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Also Twitter and LinkedIn. You can find us by searching for Epowet, E-P-O-W-E-T. Now, one of the greatest, most profitable skills that any business owner can acquire is the skill of writing. Writing clearly and writing well. Being able to effectively communicate is at the core of sales, of marketing, and even service delivery, and especially customer service. And the style that most of us learned in school, this way of writing, for instance, the essay style following MLA format, perfect punctuation, that doesn't guarantee clear communication at all. And so as we were a lot of us growing up and attending school, we were being rewarded based on these metrics that don't actually improve effectiveness of communication. In fact, a lot of those things could even be a hindrance. So in my office, I have a modest little bookshelf, and it has several different books, volumes, tombs of knowledge, if you will. And two of my favorite are The Elements of Style by William Strunk Jr. and The Art of Plain Talk by Rudolf Flesch. Both books are about communicating effectively in writing. And both books are full of my highlighting, underlining, and even my notes in the margins. But they both take a very different approach to the subject. In fact, in a way, the two books are somewhat in opposition. Nevertheless, it is my very strong opinion that both of these books should be on your bookshelf as well, and that you ought to revisit them at least once a year. Today, I'm going to dig in a little bit and see what we can learn from these books and how it can help us to become better writers and, what's more important, more effective communicators. So let's start with The Elements of Style. This is a small book. My copy is only about 70 pages long, and it consists of a list of rules, an explanation of those rules, and examples of those rules in use. For example, consider rule number 5, which reads as follows: do not join independent clauses by a comma. Here's the explanation. If two or more clauses, grammatically complete and not joined by a conjunction, are to form a single compound sentence, the proper mark of punctuation is a semicolon. And one of the examples that it provides is this: Stevenson's romances are entertaining, semicolon. They are full of exciting adventures. Now, in addition to rules about grammar and punctuation, The Elements of Style also contain rules about composition, spelling, and so on. Now, back in episode 3, I went to great lengths talking about how we ought to break the rules from time to time. But before we can do so, we need to know the rules. The Elements of Style is the rules when it comes to writing. We ought to know those rules inside and out. And this ought to be one of those books that we read and reread, and it stays on our bookshelf, and the pages are all creased up, and it has our handwriting everywhere in it. This is one of those books. It has all the rules that we need to know to help us to be good writers. And we should be well prepared also to break those rules. So that leads us to the Art of Plain Talk. Now, this book is quite different. It does have rules in it, but it's not really a book of rules. Instead, it's kind of a discussion on what communication really is, why we communicate, some ideas about how and why communication breaks down from time to time, and why complex communication is, generally speaking, so less impactful than simple communication can be. The Art of Plain Talk implores us to, quote, write for the reader and not for ourselves, unquote. It encourages us to use the tools of language, such as words, composition, punctuation, in service to readability, not necessarily just correct grammar. So whereas The Elements of Style specifically instructs us not to begin a sentence with a conjunction, for example, The Art of Plain Talk says, if it makes the ideas easier to understand, do it. So what does all that have to do with us, with marketing our businesses? Well, the art of writing for the sake of readability, while also skillfully navigating and at times breaking the rules of the English language. Those things are at the heart of copywriting. As I see it, copywriting is really the pinnacle of written communication. And of course, that's when it's done well, because the best copywriting really requires the language of literature, the creativity of fiction, composition, and descriptions of poetry, the explanation and evidence of academic writing, and the persuasion of essays. And all of these elements, and I'm sure more that I'm missing, they go into good copywriting. So how do we do this then? How do we apply the elements of style and the art of plain talk to copywriting? Well, I'm going to give you a few ideas of ways that I have integrated these ideas from those books into my own writing. And really the first thing that you need to do is you need to determine what type of writing you're actually doing. When it comes to copywriting, there are two types. There's direct response writing. This is where you're trying to convince someone to take immediate action that leads them to becoming a customer. So this is stuff like sales letters, landing pages, flyers that you might get in the mail, as well as ads, whether those be online ads or just out in the world. The second type of copywriting that we're going to do is content writing. With content writing, your goal is simply to attract the attention of someone who might become a customer later on. So not necessarily on selling them right now. And some examples of good content writing are blog posts, social media, articles, infographics, web pages, ebooks, those types of stuff. So anything where you're creating content, and a lot of times it's going to be informational content. You're creating this content to attract new readers. And as you sit down to create your content, think about what kind of writing you need to do. And, that really is the first step. So now let's talk about each of those types separately. So we'll talk about direct response writing first, and then we'll talk about content writing afterwards. And I think that content writing is actually the type of content that you're going to be, the type of writing that you're going to be doing more often. But we'll start with direct response. And of course, again, this is stuff like your landing pages and sales letters and stuff like that. So if you're going to do direct response, you have to remember that a large part of your message is going to be about convincing your ideal customers that your service or product can help them. And that's an important point, because you're not trying to convince everyone that your service or product can help them. Because the reality is, and hopefully you know this should not be news to you, but the reality is that your service and product is not for everyone, right? You have a specific type of client that you work best with and that your services and products benefit the most. And that's who you're targeting here. And so again, in direct response, you're speaking directly to those people and trying to get them to take action. And you're hoping that anyone that it doesn't apply to, they should be okay to kind of ignore it. This is something I talk about when it comes to email marketing, that when you get someone unsubscribe to your newsletter, that's actually can be a positive thing, because it indicates that that person recognizes that you're not a good fit together. Now, if that's like an ideal customer and they've unsubscribed, then that's a problem with you, right? In your content that you're putting out there. But a lot of times what happens is we get kind of these big kind of generalized email lists, and then we have to kind of whittle that down. And as people unsubscribe, we kind of learn like who we're actually targeting and how we're doing as far as that goes as well. Okay, so back to direct response. So I'm going to give you some sections that I recommend in a landing page, for example. But if you're writing like a short ad or a flyer, these principles can be used there as well. So keep that in mind, that we're talking specifically about landing pages, sales letters, stuff like that. But when it comes to the shorter form stuff, these principles, there's 4 things I'm going to give you, and they apply the same, except that you really have to condense it down and make it smaller, make it fit into the format that you're publishing on. So what you want to do is, first, you need to describe in very clear language the benefit that the customer will get from your offer. And you want to talk about like how they're going to get it. So like, let's say they're going to get a more secure network. They're not going to have to worry about viruses. They're going to be able to sleep at night knowing that their data is safe, right? That sort of thing. And you're going to tell them directly what the benefits will be. You don't want to talk so much about like you're going to have an antivirus that has, up-to-date definitions and stuff like that. Look, those are features, right? And you want to focus on benefits here, on how you're going to benefit the reader. And then, and this sounds related, but we'll talk about how it's different. Then after you do that, you're going to want to describe the way the customer's life or business life will be made better. And so you take that first section where you're talking about benefits and you dig a little bit deeper. You talk about how they're going to feel, how the company will benefit, how, for example, having a managed secure network will free the team up to work on revenue generating projects or allow them to innovate, that sort of thing, because they're not so caught up with like the day-to-day stuff that's usually bogging them down. So that's an example. You want to talk about like how really it's going to benefit their entire workflow or their entire business and how it's going to free them up to do other things, whatever the case may be. And you also need to provide proof and evidence with this as well, right? So and if you're doing like a landing page or a sales letter, a good way to provide the proof is in bullet points. And there's a specific type of bullet point that I recommend. And I didn't make this up on my own. It's from a book called Writing Copy That Sells. I apologize. I didn't have it right next to me. I had to consult my bookshelf. But the book, I have it right here, is called How to Write Copy That Sells by Ray Edwards. And so that's where I get this bullet point format from. But I've seen that it works pretty well. So I haven't had a reason to vary from it. But so the way that the bullet point works is it's kind of in two parts. First, you have the benefit or the proof statement. So for example, you could say something like having an up-to-date antivirus reduces your chance of losing data by 78%. Now, don't use that. I just made it up, but you get the point. It's like a clear statement of benefit. And my example even has like statistics in it and stuff like that. And so then after you say that, right, after you make that statement, then you say how. And you can use that by using the word by. So for example, having an up-to-date antivirus reduces your chances of losing data by 78% by filling in security holes before attackers are able to exploit them. And so you kind of have your statement and then your little like proof of how it works behind it. And you want to have like 3 to 5 of those types of bullet points. And this is important too. When you make some sort of claim, especially one like I just did where I cited like a figure, you need to be able to back it up. So you need to include a link to wherever you got that information. You really don't want your reader to think that you just made it up on the spot, or that they're going to lose confidence in you. And especially if they look it up themselves independently and they find a different figure. And it doesn't matter if you found that figure from, like the FBI website or whatever, and then they look somewhere else and they find a different figure, like they're still going to distrust you, right? Unless you include that link. So if you include, 78% and it's a hyperlink and they click on that and it takes them to the FBI website where it says the exact same thing, that's the proof that you need. And you just need to back up each and every claim that you make. And so once you've done that, right? So you have your bullet points, you have, you've talked about how you're going to benefit them. You have your bullet points of proof, how you're going to do that. Then it's time to kind of make a sell. And this isn't the same. In fact, maybe I even regret kind of saying it like that. But what you're going to do is you're going to emphasize your unique sales proposition. You need to talk about what makes your service or product different from your competitors and why it's a really good fit for your ideal customers. And this cannot be trivial, right? It has to far exceed, the cost of like switching or adopting this new solution that you're presenting. It has to be something really strong. And you need to ask for what you want outright. So you state your unique sales proposition, and then you tell them exactly what to do. So if you want them to sign up for your email list, for example, then you tell them, just put in your email address below and click the submit button, and you'll get our latest white paper or whatever it is, right? Or if you want them to call, you say, call us now at 555-1234 and give us your address and we'll send you our free tool. So it has to be clear. There should be no excuse for a prospect to not follow through on your offer. That's how clear your language should be there. And it should be frictionless as well, right? You don't want to have a form that opens up and asks them for, a whole, page of information. You want just the bare minimum of information that you need to get them what they want. So if you're giving away a white paper, then just you ask for their email address. If you want, you can ask for the name, but if you have to realize that when you do that, when you add in these other elements like their name or their phone number or whatever the case may be, you're adding friction to that process. And so the less you can have, the better. Another thing that you can do to really spruce up the selling point also is to make it a special time sensitive offer. So you can provide like a time sensitive discount, or for a limited amount of time include a free product add-on or something like that. But whatever it is, and this is important too, whatever it is, it must be truly time sensitive. You have to stick to it. If you make some kind of offer like that, but you're not really sticking to it, like you're like, oh yeah, you need to do this in the next 30 minutes. But at the same time, every time they go back to the website, it restarts that counter. Like people see through that real quick, and it really makes you look cheesy. So don't do that. If it's going to be a time sensitive offer, give it enough time to work out for you, but don't make it fake. It's got to be real. Okay, so let's review that real quick for direct response writing. If you're writing a sales letter, landing page, or any type of direct response, you want to, 1, talk about the benefits. 2, describe how those benefits will affect the reader's life and business. 3, provide concrete proof for all the claims that you're making. And 4, tell the reader exactly what to do to receive those benefits. Okay, so let's move on to content writing. Like I mentioned earlier, I think that in reality, this is the type of writing that most entrepreneurs are spending most of their time doing when it comes to writing. And the most important thing when it comes to content writing is your headline. In his book, Ogilvy on Advertising, David Ogilvy says that 5 times more people read the headline versus the body of an article. And of course, that applies to blogs too. And the best type of headline is one that gets the reader's attention and promises a benefit. Now, this is a little bit tricky for us, like in modern times, because if you're writing online, then you also have to take into account your keywords and your SEO, right? And so you kind of got to juggle both the technical side and the actual like eyes of the reader, and you got to juggle those 2 considerations to figure out what's best. And failing on either one of those is going to be detrimental, because if you have a fantastic article, but no one sees it, then no one's going to read it. On the other end of the spectrum, I've seen this in the wild, and you may have too, where you search for something and you see what you think is a promising article, and you click on it, and it's just gibberish text. It's just like full of keywords and stuff like that, and like it doesn't help you at all. And how do you feel about a company when you see an article like that? You're not super inclined to keep checking them out or see what they're offering, not at all. And so you have to really balance those 2 considerations. And when possible, and it is possible, it's difficult, but it is possible, you can optimize both of those considerations. So a few types of headlines to try out are news-related headlines, statistical headlines, so a headline that has some sort of statistic in it, quotes, a shocking factor, an incomplete sentence. An incomplete sentence is something like the best way to secure your network is ... and then you start your article. If you do something like that, you had better give them the payoff pretty quick. You don't make them wait till the end of the article. They won't get there. They'll stop caring. And not only will they stop caring, but they'll start to get annoyed that you kind of let them on like that. And so if you're going to do something like that, it's kind of clickbaity, right? And you kind of want to stay away from clickbait, especially in like professional services. So if you do something like that, provide the payoff really quick. So the best way to secure your network is, and then, right there in the introductory paragraph, give them the answer. Now you're going to want to elaborate on that answer, right? And so you want to keep a little bit of mystery there, but you need to, like I said, you need to get that payoff right away. Don't keep them waiting, or they'll simply stop caring and they'll leave. For headlines, a good practice is to write out 25 or so headlines for your content. This is something that I do. I have little prompts, right? And so it'll say like a how-to headline or a statistics headline, and I'll write out like 5 for each of those, and then there'll be like 5 different types. And so at the end, I have 25 headlines, 5 of each type. And a lot of them are garbage, and that's completely okay. Like the point of this exercise is not necessarily to come up with like the killer headline. It's mostly to just get what's in your head, what's bouncing around in your head out on the paper or on the screen, so that you can mess with it from there. And so I usually, I knock out like 25, and then I'll pick, 3 to 5 that I actually like. And then I'll begin to tweak those. I don't necessarily take them as they are, but, I like where they're going, or I like what they're implying, and I think that it'll get good readership. And so I'll begin to tweak those into something that I really like, and then I'll go from there. Another thing that you can do that I really encourage you to do actually is to also work with other people. And so if you have a team, you can, put your headlines up and say, what do you guys think of these? If you have people that you can trust, you can send it to them. This especially works really well if you have like a group of people who are part of your core audience anyway. So let's say you have like 20 people that, they respond pretty quickly. They give you good feedback and stuff, and they're actually part of like your ideal customer group. You can send this out to them and be like, hey, here's all the headlines, which one would you click on? And they let you know, and you take that information. And that works really well. I've done that several times, and that always works pretty well. I've never had it not work. So I've done other things where I found it worked better. Some of these other ways of generating headlines I found worked better. But there's a range there. Maybe I get like 11% readership versus 20% readership. But with this, like, it never drops below like the average, right? So it's always nice and high. Okay, so getting back here. So you're going to get your headlines, you're going to tweak them into something that's good, and then you're going to go from there, right? So you're going to finalize your headline. And once you've done that, then the next thing that you need to take a look at is your introduction. So your introduction really needs to do two things. First, it needs to say what you're talking about. And second, it needs to say why it matters. Now, this doesn't have to be like super long, right? If you're writing a blog post, this could be a few sentences. If you're doing a white paper, it could be 1 or 2 paragraphs. The first page of an ebook, or like if you're writing like a full-length book, this would probably be like the first chapter. And I'm realizing that actually ebooks is something that maybe I'll talk about in a later season or something. The different types of content, because there's a very big difference between a blog post, an ebook, a white paper, case studies. A lot of people kind of conflate a lot of those in their mind, but ebooks and white papers especially, I think, get conflated a lot, and they are very different things. And I'm guilty of this too. I've published ebooks, I've published white papers as the title of ebooks, and then ebooks under the title of like a guide or something. And so I'm not perfect either, but the closer we get to what's being accurate, it's just better because people kind of have an understanding of what we're offering. So maybe I'll cover different types of lead generating content in another episode. So again, going back to what this is the introduction. You're talking about what you're going to say, and you're going to say why it matters. And then when you've done that, then you kind of move on to the body of the text. And so there's kind of a few different purposes that the body of your content can serve. For example, you may be trying to educate people. And if so, this is where you do that. You may be trying to convince or persuade people, not necessarily sell though, like this isn't direct response. So you may be trying to convince people more of an idea than to actually take action on like your product, for example. But you might try to convince them of the idea that what they're doing right now doesn't work and that there's a better way. And so that's kind of a good way of looking at that. And the important thing here, so this is where you really lean on the art of plain talk, right? Over say the elements of style, because what you want to do here is you want to use short words, short sentences, and short paragraphs. The possible exception is if you're writing something like an article. When you're writing an article, you need to take into consideration the publication that you're writing it for. And so if you're writing for a more technical audience, like a publication, then you need to take that into consideration. And I still really would encourage you to kind of lean towards the art of plain talk. You don't necessarily have to always use short words and short sentences, especially if that's going to turn off the readers of that publication. But, if you're going to write something like that, err on the side of simplicity, and to the extent that you do that will depend on the publication that you are publishing for, or writing for rather. So use short words, short sentences, short paragraphs as a general rule. You also want to use headings and subheadings to break your text into more manageable sections, and then use lists and bullet points to get across the main points and you do that because it's a way that's clear and succinct. So the goal, kind of what I'm talking about here, is that the goal is to make the body as scannable as possible, because the fact is that the vast majority of your readers are not going to read every single word that you write. What they're going to do instead is they're going to scan through your content, and they're going to look for anything that jumps out at them. So this is kind of how it works. They'll take a look at it, and if the headlines speaks to them, then they'll scan the article. And if they see something that they scan and something pops out to them, then they'll read a little bit more, within that little area. And then if you keep their interest, they'll continue reading. And if you lose it, and to be honest, it's more likely that you'll lose it, they'll continue scanning till the end. And so you need to make it scannable. And so the way you do that is by exactly what I've mentioned, is using, your short paragraph, short sentences, subheadings, and bullet points. And it needs to be easy to scan, and your main points need to stand out. So whatever main points you're trying to make, put them into your subheadings and into your bullet points and stuff like that. And same as with direct response, if you're making a claim or you're trying to be convincing, you need to provide some kind of proof for that. Okay, so that's pretty much the body. So let's move on to the conclusion. The conclusion is usually just a closing paragraph, unless you're writing a full-length book, in which case it may be the last chapter or like a afterword or what have you. And so what you need to do here is you need to do a few things in your closing paragraph. You need to summarize the points that you've made. You need to talk about why your topic matters. And again, like 1 or 2 sentences on each of these max. And then this is really important. You need to tell the reader how to apply the information that you've given them. Okay. And then you need to talk about what they need to do next. So if they read something and let's say you're writing to convince them that they have a problem and that there's a better way to solve it than the way that they're trying to solve it now, you need to give them information on how they can learn more about that. So not necessarily how they can buy, because they may not be at that stage yet. And if you're writing, this type of content rather than like direct response, then they're not necessarily at that stage yet. And so you just need to provide them information on how they can learn more. So to summarize content writing, first, make sure you have a killer headline. You need to have an introduction to tell people what you're talking about and why it matters. Write your body to inform or persuade your readers, and then have a closing paragraph that summarizes your main points and tells the reader what to do next. Now, if you're a technical service provider, you may think that you need to communicate using technical language. Again, unless you're writing specifically for a technical publication, then that's not going to be the truth. Okay. Nothing can be further from the truth. Instead, it's very likely that your customers, people that you're writing to, are not technical people. And if you talk tech jargon, you're going to lose them. So write correctly, write clearly, focus on readability over grammar. Okay. And again, the 2 books that I highly recommend that you have are The Elements of Style by William Strunk and The Art of Plain Talk by Rudolf Flesch. So as you apply the lessons that you learn from those books, you'll be able to communicate more clearly and more effectively with your audience. You'll be able to showcase your unique sales proposition and increase sales, whether you're using direct response or content copywriting. And even aside from that, you can use these same principles in your documentation, when training new employees, when emailing a business partner, when doing customer service, and so on. Next week, we're going to dive back into SEO, I think. We'll talk a little bit about online citations. Online citations is actually a pretty simple topic, but it's rarely understood very well by most people. Most people just kind of don't get it. They don't know what it is, or they don't know why it matters. So join us next week. We're going to go into all about that.